Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Joffrey Noodle Legs here today with a top 10. It's been a while since I've done one, really. I know I did one a few weeks ago saying sort of 10 movies that got me into the horror, to be a horror fanatic, but that wasn't a top 10. That was just 10 films that really got me into the hobby. This is a top 10 of my sort of favourites, and today we're looking at my top 10 favourite fantasy horror. Now, this was again another minefield of a selection, because most horror films are quite fantasy based. So when I say fantasy, I mean ones that are like a little bit out there, a little bit another dimension sort of thing, or that kind of thing. It's like out of real life, where slashers can happen. Zombie films are another one that could have been in the fantasy thing, but I'll say it's going to happen, but you never know. Yeah. But yeah, that could have been in the fantasy, some zombie films, but other sort of ones like slashers and demonic ones, they're their own sort of genre. So these are sort of ones that are a bit more, I suppose, different sort of dimension kind of thing. Again, I could have put the paranormals in there, but I went for films that were a little bit more sort of fantasy based, like in your head sort of thing, really. And sort of like, when I mean fantasy, I don't mean like Conan the Barbarian or anything like that. I mean films that could, that were sort of like made up by someone's sort of creative mind, if you like. So here's my favourite top 10. Starting off at number 10, we've got a sort of ghost story, and I've got Poltergeist. Now this one is kind of like based on a girl that sort of gets communicated by these ghost spirits in her house, and she gets sucked into the sort of television, well, not into the television, but they communicate with her via the television, but she gets sucked into the cupboard. There's some sort of demonic sort of ghost or spirit got a hold of her, and her family are trying to get her back out of it. So this is in my number 10. It's probably a very famous film by Tobe Hooper film, produced by Steven Spielberg. Yeah, it's a cool film, really cool 80s film, and it's sort of like a real sort of fantastic sort of story. So that's why it's in there. You know this is never going to happen or anything like that. So that's in at number 10 as my 10th favourite fantasy film. So you can see where I'm going with this, right? It's sort of films that are not realistic, and it could be almost dreamlike, because this next one's a dreamlike one, and it's a Nightmare in Elm Street. I'm going to put Nightmare on Elm Street and probably Dream Warriors, because I think they're probably my favourite two in there as fantasy films. Obviously, this is about Freddy Krueger, a killer who kills people in their dreams. So if you don't wake up from your dream, you die. And so it's like a real unrealistic sort of like a fantasy world where you're dragged into Freddy's world, and he's sort of like all these different sort of like really strange sort of dream sequences. So it's a real sort of like real fantasy, in the sense of like the imagination that's gone in to build these different sort of worlds and sort of situations. So number 9 is the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. It's easier to say that, isn't it? Number 8 is a 1970s film by David Cronenberg, and it's The Brood. And this is a very strange story. It's about this. It's about this doctor that's been doing these sort of like almost like experiments with sort of children, and we've got this woman who's got like this sort of monster child growing out of her on the outside, and it's a really strange sort of thing, and there's these two killer sort of children. Sorry about that, guys. The phone was ringing, and it's about like these killer children that are sort of like yeah, it's a really strange story, really sort of fantastic, and it's like a really bizarre sort of ending. And I just thought, well, yeah, I thought I'd put that in as a fantasy film, because it's like it's something that couldn't really happen. And it's like this creature thing that's been growing on the outside of this woman, and she sort of like gives birth to it, sort of thing. and it's really cool. It stars Oliver Reed, and it's a really good film. But I do love David Cronenberg films. Most of his films could be looked upon as being pretty much fantasy. They're all sort of scientific sort of fantasy and medical sort of fantasy. So that's what I'd put that under, and that's The Brood at my number 8. Number 7 is one that you don't hear about very much, starring Tony Curtis, and it's called The Manitou. And this is another strange story, not too different to The Brood. It's about this Indian, this sort of like Native American Indian that's growing inside this woman. She becomes pregnant and it gets born like a fully grown Indian man. It's such a strange film, but it was so sort of like out there for its time. This is again, I think, 1970s film, I believe, and it was so out there for its time. And I remember watching it, and I thought, what is going on? A bit like that film Jacob's Ladder. You know, you don't know what's going on in that until later on you've watched it a few times. And this is that sort of film. It requires a few viewings, but yeah, it's a really cool sort of film. The Manitou. I wish someone like Arrow would pick this up and release a proper Blu-ray version of it. I've only got the DVD. That's number 7. Number 6, it's one that I've actually reviewed on my channel before, and it's Brain Damage. And this is about a guy that sort of he's got this tiny little like little brain sort of creature there, and it's sort of like living within his brain. It's almost like a and it craves for human blood sort of thing. And it's such a fantasy, sort of fantastic story. This little brain thing that this old couple were keeping, that they've had it for years and years, and it's got out, and he's got it now, and it sort of like penetrates his brain, and it makes him do weird and wonderful things. It's a very strange film, but very sort of fantasy. You know what I mean? There's nothing like this could ever happen. So it's really cool. It's from the makers of Basket Case, if ever you've seen that. That's a fantasy film as well. I mean, I could have put that in here, to be honest, but it's very similar to Basket Case. Brain Damage at number 6. So we're to the top 5. Most of these are quite obvious. Number 5 is like a slasher, and it's Jeepers Creepers. Again, this is more of a fantasy sort of slasher, as it's about a creature. Not like a killer as such. Well, he's a killer, but he's a creature with like these huge wings, and he's like almost semi-reptile, semi sort of like bat almost. It's a strange sort of a concept, and it is a very strange concept of a film, but it works. It really works. It works more as a sort of road horror film, really, road trip sort of film, but it's actually got a creature in it, so it's more of a fantasy sort of slasher. So I thought, well, I better put a slasher in there, because I love them. And Jeepers Creepers is really cool. Really great film, and it's such a bizarre story about this young couple that see this creature who's sort of like killing off people on the motorway, and sort of like doing sort of all different things to their bodies and making them in all sort of things, something like mannequins, all sort of strange sort of things going on. So yeah, Jeepers Creepers is in at number 5. Number 4, another kind of slasher in a way, but it's more of an urban sort of tale, really, and that's Candyman. Again, I look at this as a fantasy horror, just because it's based on like a myth, an urban sort of myth, where they believe there's this killer that killed children, you know, with sweets, and if you say his name in the mirror 3 or 5 times, whichever one it is, he comes and gets you. So it's a sort of fantasy, sort of urban legend sort of film, which is really cool. Got to have it in there. A great film. Don't talk about it enough. I'll probably do this one night on my late night horror reviews, because I should put it on my channel, really. There we go, down to the top 3. Top 3, number 3, fantastic movie. I love it, from Norway, and it's Troll Hunter. Again, based on sort of Nordic fables and stuff like that. So it's all sort of like fantasy tales and fantasy stories built on about these trolls. And this is based on an actual troll hunter and his student film crew following this troll hunter, and he discovered that trolls are real. And there's some fantastic trolls in it, and it's really, really amazing. I love trolls. One of my favourite things. They really, really are. So number 3, Troll Hunter, amazing film. Number 2, another one I don't really talk about too much. It's about a sort of childhood sort of nightmare sort of story, and it's the Babadook. Again, it's another sort of fantasy, and it's based on this children's sort of like book, and it's like a creature in there, the Babadook, and he sort of comes out and sort of frightens the family and the woman, and I think it's a single mum and the son, and you know, it's one of those sort of terrorizing kind of horror films, but it's all sort of fantasy based on like a fairy tale sort of book, a children's book. So I thought, well, I better put something like that in there because it's a bit different. So number 2, the Babadook. So number 1 has to be, and can only be, the Hellraiser films. I mean, Clive Barker's genius brain to create this whole world of like where these Cenobites live, like between hell and earth, and they're sort of like almost like disciples of hell, doing the work. And it's all about this special puzzle box. If you open it, you open the gateway to hell, and you come across this sort of like these Cenobites, and they have all these tools to torture you, to whatever it is that they desire, and whatever you desire, that they are there for it. And I think it was such an imaginative film and creative, that these are my favourite fantasy horror films of all time, and I can't see them getting better than Hellraiser franchise. So I am saying that franchise as a whole, because there's some cracking films. There's been some okay ones, but there's some really amazing films. But it's all again down to the imagination of the creator. Absolutely fantastic. So there you go, guys. That's my 10 favourite fantasy horror films. What are yours? Let me know down below what your favourite ones are. It is quite a difficult genre to go through, because there's loads of sort of ghosts and demonic ones, you know, Insidious and all this. You could really class as fantasy horror, you know, and things like this, Paranormal Activity. But because a lot of people believe in those sort of like paranormal things and the sort of demonic possessions and things like that, and obviously slashers are really sort of serial killer films, really, aren't they? It's difficult to put them in unless they've got some sort of fantasy thing about like Jeepers Creepers, where it's a creature, not an actual person. So it's cool to think about it, and it is quite a minefield, because other fantasy horrors could be, you know, American Werewolf in London's a fantasy horror, you know what I mean? So there's just so many sort of things you could have put in here, you know. But that's my 10, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out some horror channels for me. Please check out Horror Hands, Horror Geek, Man v Film, RS Designs, Pizzawell, I Am the Ice Lord, Cat Watches Horror Movies, Grumpy Andrew's Haunted House, and Sarah of Horror. Until next time, look after yourselves, look after one another, and I really hope I see you all soon.